All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience today as we get started. Good morning, folks. My name is Eric Coe, and I'm the Deputy Director for REI Systems Advisory Services Practice. It is my privilege to serve as the moderator for today's webinar titled Mastering Cloud Operations, Best Practices for Federal Agencies. Thanks for joining today. During today's session, we're going to shine a light on an important resource that has recently been published and made available publicly on the CIO.gov website. The Cloud Operations Best Practices and Resources Guide is a result of a lot of hard work from a talented group of federal employees. Led by GSA's IT Modernization Division within the Office of Technology Policy, this initiative involved contributions and insights from 80+ individuals across 31 federal agencies. Ultimately, the guide was created with the goal of providing best practices and resources to support agencies in developing and maintaining efficient and effective cloud operations. We'll provide a link to the guide in the chat. So allow me to take a step back and revisit a few key milestones of the federal government's cloud journey. Many of you may remember the initial federal cloud computing strategy, Cloud First, which was released in 2010. Then in 2017, OMB released an updated strategy, Cloud Smart. Unlike its predecessor, which heavily emphasized and granted broad authority for cloud adoption, Cloud Smart offers practical implementation guidance for government missions to fully actualize the promise and potential of cloud-based technologies while ensuring thoughtful execution that incorporates practical realities. Today, I think we can all agree the federal government has made impressive strides on its cloud journey. Most agencies have a presence in the cloud, have invested significant resources in cloud technologies, and are dependent on the cloud to serve their important missions. During our discussion today, we will engage in a dialogue with a diverse group of speakers who will share their own perspectives, experiences, and lessons learned. And with that said, let's transition to our first speaker. I, along with my colleagues at REI Systems, have had the honor of working closely with this individual over the past several years through some of our work at GSA. Kieran Balsa is the Deputy Director for the IT Modernization Division within the General Services Administration Office of Technology Policy. Kieran has over 20 years of experience as an IT professional, which includes 6 years as an active duty Air Force officer. He has held numerous roles over his career focused on program and project management, large enterprise strategy development, and technology implementation. He holds an undergraduate degree in business administration and a master's in management. In his free time, outside of shuttling his 3 children to after-school activities, Kieran is an avid traveler, having visited over 25 countries. He enjoys cooking and his gym time. Kieran, are you with us?
Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
I sure can. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, sorry about that. My work computer had some issues, but I'm on now.
No worries. You're here. Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you. So let's kick things off. I'm going to start with a few very basic questions for you, Kieran. I want to talk about this guide today. I know that's a big focus of ours. Let's start with, what was the purpose of developing this guide and why now of all times?
Sure. So unfortunately, I missed the beginning of the webinar, so I don't know if you kind of gave an overview of the PMO or anything like that, but I'll set the stage a little bit. So,
yeah, please do. I haven't had a chance to touch on that, so that'd be super helpful.
Sure. So first, thanks everyone at REI for inviting us to participate in your webinar. So it's a great opportunity for us, and I'm going to set the stage a little bit. So we work in the Office of Government-Wide Policy within GSA. And the group we work in, it's about 8 years old, give or take a few years. And the entire premise was to help, when it was formed, was to help agencies optimize their data center footprint with the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative. And it expanded out into cloud adoption and optimization. And the group itself helped create the Cloud Smart strategy. So we're heavily vested in agencies' success and adoption in the cloud area. So with that being said, over the years, we've been providing guidance to federal agencies on numerous topics, primarily, cloud data centers and general IT modernization. And on an annual basis, we actually poll our community of practice, which is about 4,000 strong, on what's most important to them. And as of last year, when we polled the community, one of the top results was essentially operations, and primarily cloud operations. The reality is that federal agencies, they've adopted cloud services. The conversation has shifted from, should we go to cloud, to, okay, we're there. How do we make things better? And that's what we've tried to do. And that's really the genesis for this document. Other things that we've put out that are kind of complementary. 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we put out the Federal Cloud Strategy Guide. And that was, 3-4 years ago, where the conversation was still, how do we get there? What's the best way to get there? And we've gone beyond that point. And over the years, we've put out other guidance that relates to container adoption within infrastructure environments. We've provided guidance related to tagging. We've provided guidance related to hybrid cloud adoption. And some core documents the federal community has had access to. And it would be the application rationalization playbook. So all of these can be found off of CIO.gov. But the idea behind our group is essentially to support the community, and that's why we created this document.
That's great, Karen. Thanks so much for sharing. A lot of impressive work coming out of your group there within GSA. Let's talk a little bit about the process of creating this guide. Who was involved? How long did it take? You mind sharing more information about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done a lot of interagency working groups, and this is no different. So I think the key thing here was that it resonated a lot with agencies just because the timing was right. So we actually got sponsored by the CIO Council's EOPS subcommittee. We went to them and stated that our community is requesting content related to cloud optimization. And they said, okay, go forth and, produce something. So we did. So we established an interagency working group with about 80 participants that represent 30 different agencies. So it's a lot of folks that were involved in this. And I think that's how, everything we do, we really rely on subject matter expertise across the federal space. And it turned out very, very well for us. We were very fortunate to have people like Beth and Bill that are both on the panel participate. And we had many others who brought a lot to the table. And I certainly want to thank, the REI team members that helped create this. For 4 years, I've been working with my REI partners here, and there's nothing but excellence when you guys come to the table and work on these products. So definitely want to thank Laura Cullum and Mark Bellinger for working on this product. Couldn't have done it without them. Mark and Laura spent so many hours kind of perfecting this and taking the raw input from the subject matter expertise out there and creating this amazing product that you guys see.
Thank you, Karen. Let's talk a little bit about the guide itself and the audience. Who is it intended for?
Yeah, so we always struggle with that, is trying to figure out what message we should be sending out. And we felt for this, really, I'd say the C-level folks, they can look at it, but it's a little bit more granular and a bit more technical in some aspects. A lot of it isn't, and a lot of it they could benefit from. But I'd say the sweet spot would be for the folks that are directly responsible for cloud operations. Could be on the technical side, definitely a technical manager side. So that's really the folks that I would think would benefit the most. But anyone can take a look at it. Obviously we're federal employees and we created this for the federal community, but the reality is that most of this content applies for anyone in a cloud environment. So our partners at state and local, they can certainly benefit from it. Even private sector companies, there's nothing precluding them from taking a look at this and, getting something out of it.
Yeah, thanks. And by the way, I just wanted to remind the audience, feel free to enter questions in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye, and my teammates will help you as well, but we'd love to hear if you have any questions. So keep them coming if you have them. All right, Karen, thanks. So that was super helpful. So I know that this guide has a modular design of separate standalone sections. How would you recommend that readers, approach using this guide, and how can they obtain the most value from it?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So it is modular by design, and I understand, I've been working at an agency. I worked at an agency before. I understand that people have a lot of competing priorities. They don't have time to flip through a 110-page guide and book. So I think anything we put out, we try to keep it modular these days. And you can really go to the section that's most relevant to you. After interacting with a lot of different agencies, small and large, I've realized there's a spectrum of adoption. So some folks may benefit from maybe just taking a look at the financial management section. Some folks may feel like they want to be a bit more comprehensive and look at all of them. So the way it's structured, we have 4 core sections focused on leadership, security, business management, platform engineering. Leadership really is focused on developing strategy. And then one thing I want to mention, I don't think I mentioned this before, but within the document, we're not trying to recreate the wheel at all. So we do link to a lot of existing content that's available, ours and others. So for example, in the leadership section, we do call on a lot of the content from the cloud strategy guide that we developed a few years ago. 2 years old, but a lot of the content is still pertinent and relevant. Things like stakeholder analysis, self-discovery, those things don't change. So all, that being said, there's about 30 or 35 different subsections to this. So there's a lot. So you just kind of have to pick and figure out what makes sense and what's most relevant for you.
Thanks, Karen. Certainly a comprehensive resource. You can read it cover to cover, or you can jump in wherever it's relevant for you. Makes sense. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest takeaways you want readers to draw from the guide? I know you kind of touched on them a little bit. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it's hard to kind of just distill everything down into a couple takeaways because there is so much good content in there. I think I just have to echo what Beth said, that really you can't replicate what you're doing on your on-prem data center in a cloud environment. You really have to manage your resources and right-size them. Having aspects of financial management is kind of key to optimizing your presence in the cloud. Having applications that are really, not resource intensive and that are cost effective as well, that's very important. So you have to kind of look into that. You don't want to over provision. And automation really is key for optimization. I think once you're in an infrastructure environment, you have so many opportunities to automate everything that you do. And it's really comes down to the level of time and investments an agency is going to make to get to a level of maturity in the automation side. You can do basic provisioning, you can do deprovisioning, you can do resource scaling, network administration, storage management, everything. Everything can be automated. If your folks know infrastructure as code, then they can certainly do things like that. I'd say other things that are takeaways is governance. That's always important. Having the right level of governance is important. I think if I can just tell you a quick, story from my previous job, I worked at a large agency in the headquarters, and we were a service provider for our sub agencies, and it was important to have a level of governance. But we became ISO 20000, ISO 27000 certified, and if anyone's been ISO certified, they understand the level of effort it takes to maintain those certifications. And we had so many processes that we had to adhere to, and we get audited, and it just didn't work in a fast-paced, agile cloud environment. So I think you have to pick the right amount of governance for your agency. In the guide itself, we make about 10 recommendations on the right governance policies that agencies can leverage. Even change management. That's something that agencies should look at. If anyone's been involved in a typical change management process in enterprise, it could take a couple of weeks to accomplish anything, the most basic things, right? That doesn't work in a cloud environment when you have decentralized access and you have business units that want to provision a basic service. So we make recommendations for essentially automating, low risk and moderate risk changes, and then potentially having human intervention in high risk. So I think that's a key takeaway, is that you really have to kind of form your governance principles around how you want to operate, and you don't want to impede progress, right? And the workforce, that's something that we harp on a lot within this document. You have to have a workforce who's trained, who's able to maintain these sophisticated and complex environments. I've been involved in hiring panels for cloud related positions, and it's really tough to find the right folks. So I think if anyone's been involved in trying to hire the right folks for their cloud environments, they know that it's a challenge out there. It's a competitive marketplace. So definitely spend time up front understanding the workforce that you have on hand, and then make the investments to make them successful. And then a final key takeaway that probably would be worth talking about is essentially your organization, your IT apparatus. It should really be modeled around what fits your business needs. You can think about having either a centralized product-centric IT team or a decentralized like developer-based model. So that has to be thought through. It takes time to change your organization, and then we provide guidance on essentially some guiding principles on how to do that. So I'd say those are some key takeaways that folks can gather from the document.
Yeah, that's great, Karen. Thanks so much. And I'm kind of hearing a common theme between you and Beth, which is, there's multiple facets to cloud operations. There's sort of a holistic approach we have to take. It's not just about the technology. It's about the people, the processes, governance. You mentioned change management, workforce. So there's a lot to it. And I think this guide does a great job of sort of, speaking to all those elements.
Absolutely.
So you'd mentioned you work, within the Office of Government Policy and the IT Modernization Division. I know there's a lot going on in 2024. Mind sharing a little bit about what's next in the year 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that it's going to shape out to be an exciting year. So I think one thing that we're trying to do is expand the focus of our community of practice. And like I said before, the genesis for the group has been the data center optimization initiative. And I think we're kind of broadened that out to a general IT modernization scope. And we have established a new low-code, no-code subcommunity of practice. We had the first hybrid kickoff event yesterday at the Department of Interior. It's very successful. We probably had 200 people online and about 70 or 80 people in person there. So there's a lot of excitement there. So more to come in that realm. If anyone who's attending is interested in low-code, no-code development, reach out to us, and then I'm sure that Eric and his team can send out our email contacts at the end, and then we'd be happy to connect you guys into that group. So that's on the horizon. We are potentially working with the CDO Council on guidance related to storage and data management. So that's being scoped out right now, and that's something that's going to be on the horizon. We'll probably establish a working group for that. And we've been in communications with the CIO Council to talk about further expanding our community of practice to include like product management, Agile, DevSecOps. I don't know how that's going to evolve, but we probably have a flavor of something like that within our group. And there is upcoming legislation that's on the horizon that could pertain to data centers and more optimization requirements for agencies. So that's something that could be potentially popping up in 2024. So that's just some of the work that we have going on. Obviously, there's other things that we continually do. Like we have a colleague, Lee Ellis, he's working on IPv6 for the federal government. So that's something that's definitely important to us. And then we have Fred Bissell, who's leading our training program. So we offer a lot of free training. So definitely reach out to us if you're interested in network and cloud-based training. We'll continue to do that and hopefully expand on that. So there's a lot coming out in 2024.
Certainly exciting year ahead of us. Well, Karen, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric.
Beth Wisniewski is an IT program manager with the Office of Technology and Delivery, Division of Infrastructure and Operations, Office of Digital Transformation at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She's an accomplished IT professional with over 15 years of experience as a technical project manager and team lead, following 10 years as a network engineer. Her previous experience includes mid-level and large government and infrastructure projects. Ms. Wisniewski has most recently served as the FDA Cloud Engineering Team Lead, which is responsible for supporting Amazon Web Services there at FDA. In that role, she utilizes her broad knowledge of information technology and cloud computing and usage to manage multiple complex cross-team initiatives from analysis, architecture, and design through development implementation. And prior to joining FDA, Beth has held senior manager and network engineering roles at DRT Technologies, Unisys, and EDS. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in criminal justice from the University of Delaware, previously has held Microsoft and Cisco certifications, and currently holds certifications as a project management professional and AWS cloud practitioner. Hi, Beth. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you.
So to kick things off, here's my question. How did FDA's business requirements shape your strategy and tactics for transitioning to and implementing cloud infrastructures?
So when FDA's original cloud environment, AWS environment, was stood up in about 2015, it was configured and set up in a way that very much emulated the on-prem architecture. And so business practices and ways of doing business were very much similar to what was done on-prem. As technology changed and as people became more cloud savvy, there was an evolution and there was a desire to take advantage of some functionalities that were available in the cloud. Because our architecture was emulating the on-prem, we needed to sort of implement a more advanced, modern multi-account architecture that allowed for some of the new functionalities. So we implemented a multi-account architecture that provided more functionalities, allowed more control for our application teams to be able to take advantage of some of the functionalities that were available in the cloud.
Yeah, that's great. So if I hear you correctly, it's, focus on the business need, focus on the requirements gathering up front rather than sort of focusing on the solution initially. That makes a lot of sense. It's helpful.
Right. So that was sort of one of the things that we learned was when we began our cloud journey, it was very much emulating our on-prem and how we did business on-prem. What we learned as we matured was don't try to emulate exactly what is on-prem. Focus on what the requirement is and then determine the best way to accomplish that requirement in the cloud. Yeah. And that is not just for technical aspects, that's also for reporting, governance, budget, other administrative. So that was one of the biggest items that we learned as we were maturing our cloud presence.
Great, thanks for sharing. What challenges did you face when transitioning from legacy account structures to a best practice type structure?
Again, same theme. We needed to adopt a new way of doing business and look at how we could best accomplish our goals in the cloud. So one of the great functionalities the cloud offered was agility and the ability for our application teams to have more control. In order to provide that, we needed to develop governance to make sure that while giving our application teams the ability to do more, we weren't opening ourselves up to more risk. So we needed to develop processes that were able to provide governance and guardrails while giving the functionality and allowing our application teams to do self-service provisioning. We also needed to limit what they were able to do and make sure that they were doing it within the confines and the guardrails of our environment. We also needed to adopt ways of controlling cost security. So the multi-account architecture allowed us to give very strong reporting, cost boundaries, security boundaries. So that allowed us to provide our application teams with abilities without introducing, extra risk more risk than would be acceptable.
Sense. Now about some of the best practices for handling cloud account management issues across a cloud environment. Tell us a little bit about your experience there at FDA.
So the best way to do it is each organization would look at what works for them, what makes sense. And in the case of FDA, we wanted to make sure that we were able to track cost and usage as well as security. And so we did it down to application and environment level. That works for us. That might not work for other organizations. If you've got an application team that's responsible for multiple applications, you might not need to go down to an application level for an account boundary. You might have it at a business unit level. So the approach I would recommend is look at your organization and look at what makes sense, what kind of boundaries and division levels make sense, both for reporting, for cost, for security, for administration, and create an account structure that allows you to work most efficiently within those parameters.
So if I hear you correctly, tailor it for your agency and for your organization. It's not a one size fits all.
Exactly. But look at what would make sense. And again, what works for your agency versus what another agency is doing.
That's great. That's super helpful. Any other best practices or considerations that you would like to highlight for the audience today?
Yeah. So one of my big common themes is don't try to emulate what's being done on-prem. That is, I think, a big pitfall, and I think it's human nature. You're used to doing things certain ways, and so when moving to the cloud, there might be a tendency to say, this is what we need to do. And that's really not it. The answer is not, this is what we need to do. The question should be, this is our requirement. What's the best way to get there? So that's one big thing. Some other ones are be agile. The cloud is agile. So again, if we try to do things the exact same way we're doing it on-prem, we're not taking advantage of that agility. And that goes for funding specifically. The way funding and forecasting and budgeting may have been done for years and years on-prem doesn't really work great in the cloud. And if you try to, make that the way you do it, you're not going to give your application teams the ability to take advantage of that agility the cloud offers. So you need, agile processes. Another big thing, again, is there are functionalities in the cloud that don't exist on-prem. So if you try to say, we're going to, host our application in the cloud exactly how it's hosted on-prem, it's not only going to be less expensive, it's probably going to be more expensive. So the idea is look at what the cloud can offer. That goes for, uptime. When you buy hardware and resources on-prem, you pay for it. So you're paying for it whether you're running it or not 24/7, 365. In the cloud, you have the ability to shut resources off when they're not being used. So take advantage of that. Look at, okay, these are non-production resources. Let's shut them off when they're not being used, whether that's just business hours or especially in dev environments when you're not using them. So look at what the cloud offers that on-prem does not. Another big one for that is right sizing. When we buy resources on-premise, we're stuck with them. So if we had to, either we intentionally had to provision for the peak usage or we overestimated. On-prem, you're stuck with it. In the cloud, you're not. So again, it's looking at the functionalities that the cloud provides that on-prem did not and taking advantage of them and making sure that you're incorporating those into your standard operating procedures, your practices, et cetera, and being taking that opportunity to be flexible and agile and all those things that the cloud is that on-prem wasn't.
So it sounds like at some point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, you've overestimated, but right sizing allows you to sort of, I think, calibrate and sort of make the needed adjustments. Is that accurate?
It's very accurate. And that's a tendency, as I said, it could be intentional because on-prem, if you needed to make sure you were provisioned for peak utilization, you had that peak utilization, you had that hardware all the time, and you had to have it because you had to be prepared for peak utilization. In the cloud, you can spin up when you need it, you can spin down when you don't, you can expand when you need it, you can contract when you don't, and so those are things that I think those are paradigm shifts for application teams because we're so stuck on what we've done for so many years. So those are my biggest takeaways. And as I said, it's technical, it's not technical, it's administrative, it's governance, it's everything. It's really having to stop looking at how we've done business and say, what is our end goal? And now what's the best way that we can reach that end goal with all of the new functionalities that the cloud provides?
And Beth, I think that is a key theme in the Cloud Ops guide that we're talking about today is sort of that holistic approach. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next for our last and final speaker, Bill Kasenchar is a principal with REI Systems and serves as a subject matter expert in technology business management, or TBM, and FinOps for the government-wide TBM PMO that resides within GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy. Bill is a change leader with 15 years of experience managing IT as a business. He consistently finds novel approaches for business decisions through technology and data, and he interconnects IT disciplines through TBM, FinOps, and sound business processes to deliver value to the government-wide TBM PMO and other agencies, creating tools that are available to be used government-wide. He also operates with passion and commitment to drive the shared mission of the government-wide IT Vendor Management Office in providing resources and guidance through vendor spend analysis, cloud acquisitions, and cost avoidance for agencies to make the best buying decision. Bill's also been an instructor for the TBM Council's Executive Foundation course for almost 10 years. Bill, it's great to have you here today, and thanks for joining us. So to get started, what are some of the key strategies for managing costs regarding cloud operations?
Thanks so much, Eric. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different things, and Beth and Karen hit on some of them. So we might get a little bit redundant, but the idea is that the cloud and cloud operation is very different. Um, in that, as Beth mentioned, you put something in the cloud, and even if you're not using it, you're still paying for it. So the idea that you can just set it and forget it, those days are over. So for cloud operations, you really have to look at things on a more more real-time basis, whether that's um, monthly is probably not good enough, but it has to be more of a daily, weekly kind of thing. You have to look at trends in your data, look at anomalies that might crop up, and more importantly, look at what's used and what's not being used, right? So there's a lot of times where you can spin things up or spin things down. And if you spin a reserved instance down, or other computing instance down, is the storage still attached? Is the storage still necessary? Is it going to spin back up? Those things are really important to know, because if not, they're costing you money. And the worst thing you can do is to get rid of and decommission a server, and yet have the storage hanging on and costing you money month over month. Now, of course, in the government and elsewhere, there are some retention policies. There's some requirements for logging. So you can't just get rid of all storage just because it's not attached to a compute resource. But you really have to pay attention to the tiering of the storage at that point. Where is the best place for that storage if we have to keep it, right? Can we just archive it? Can it go into a place where, we can get at it if we need it? The other considerations is when you put stuff in the cloud, and storage in the cloud, you're not just getting charged for the space you're consuming, you're also getting charged for the IO, the input and the output, the retrieval of it. So sometimes it's free to store the data, but it costs a lot to retrieve it. So all those considerations have to be taken into consideration.
Very helpful, Bill. Let's talk a little bit about FinOps. I know you've been involved in several important kind of gov-wide FinOps initiatives. Maybe share a little bit about your experiences there, if you mind.
So we talked over the past year, we talked to a lot of different organizations, with a lot of different maturity in the cloud and a lot of different spend in the cloud. We talked to OPM and NRC on one end of the spectrum. We talked to Energy, kind of in the middle of the spectrum, and then VA and Army, which are on the other end of the spectrum as far as, cloud spend, ranging, between all those organizations are ranging from, $10,000 a month to $10 million a month. And it's amazing though that the structure of their organizations and the way they optimize, they kind of have to approach it all in a similar manner. They all have to optimize, whether you're big or small, your budgets are what they are. And so if your budget's small, then you really have to pay attention to saving every last penny. And even if your budgets are big, there's so much that you have to do that you still have to be considerate of every last penny or dollar that you're spending in the cloud. So all those organizations, when we talk to them, they really looked at the different aspects of what they can do to optimize their cloud footprint, and they looked at those things I just mentioned, like unattached storage, but also the trend analysis and anomaly detection is really important, especially at the bigger end, where it's really hard to find those anomalies when you have so much spend in the cloud. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. It's a spot where I think over the next couple of years, AI is going to take a really big piece of that in order to find those anomalies going on. And then you also have to work on what is out in the cloud, and what is coming, right? So in any organization and in any fiscal period, you have some standard steady state stuff. You have some stuff you're decommissioning, and then you have to forecast what is going to be net new over the next fiscal period. And that's really important, especially the way contracting works in the government. You really have to kind of hit the nail on the head, making sure that your forecast and your contracting for that cloud spend really aligns with the reality of what you're going to spend, so you're not leaving any money on the table. A couple of the other things that really are important is the aspects of what the cloud service providers have available as options and for discounts. Reserved instances, savings plans. Everybody that we talk to is using them at some level in the best of their ability with the constraints around government procurement to save what we can. And then, you can do more with the budget dollars that they have. So I think those are really important. The other aspect that a lot of agencies do is even before savings plans or reserved instances is scheduling. So if you have dev and test and it doesn't have to run at night or on the weekends, that's a lot more savings. You can save about 67%. And that's a lot more savings than you would get out of a savings plan or a reserved instance. So a lot of different balls in the air, a lot of different items to manage and to pay attention to in order to make the best of your cloud environment.
That's helpful, Bill. Thank you. Speaking of cost savings, any ideas or recommendations on sort of typical low-hanging fruit? Is that something that came up with some of the pilots that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, I think it's a little bit different from every organization, but what we found is when we got to look at some data in depth is that there were always some areas where a storage retention policy or unattached storage or right sizing, as Beth mentioned, is that they go under the covers. They're not necessarily noticed. So I think having some reporting capability, consistent reporting across your cloud environments is really important so that you can see those trends as they're occurring. You can't wait for the monthly bill. You have to look at those things sometimes on a daily basis in order to find where you can save money.
That's great advice. Thank you, Bill. Let's talk about cloud native tools. You mentioned, cloud service providers earlier. Are the tools made available by these providers sufficient, for identifying cost savings opportunities, especially within the federal government space?
So I think, most of the tools that the cloud service providers offer are free to use. There's a couple of the more sophisticated tools that they each have that may cost a little bit, but they're generally pretty reasonable in price. And they're generally pretty effective in doing some of that anomaly detection and doing some of that optimization and finding the unattached storage and finding dormant or underutilized compute resources. So they actually are all pretty good. Some of them have decent visualizations that are good to look at, and then you all have that ability to export or extract data so you can do other visualizations or other analysis offline in Tableau or Power BI, whatever the utilities, or even Excel for that matter. So I think that they all have really good points, some better than others in various areas, but I think they're all useful tools to have in the toolbox. I think the big thing when it comes from a tools perspective is that you're generating so much data. And if you are a multi-cloud environment, if you're using, any of the top 3 or 4, Google, AWS, Azure, Oracle, whatever, once you get into a multi-cloud environment, it's a little harder to manage because you kind of have to do the same thing for every instance, for every environment. And even, more so if you are not operating at an enterprise level and using enterprise contracting, you may have to have some of those tools looking only at the data that they have access to from an account perspective. So I think, being an enterprise contract level allows you more freedom to use that tool to its fullest extent across the agency and potentially the bureaus that might also be involved in an umbrella contract or a subscription. But once you get to a multi-cloud environment, then you might want to start looking at third-party tools. Some of the third-party tools, they allow you to connect to multi-cloud environments and then aggregate the data, and then they can do some of the analysis that you can do independently, but it just might take longer. So I think it depends on your environment, how big your spend is in each of those environments from multi-cloud or multi-service provider perspective, and then determine what your best bet is. I would not recommend to anyone that they jump to a third-party tool too quickly. Make sure that you know what you're doing in each environment explicitly ahead of time, and then you can look at those third-party tools and see how they can help you get to the next level of savings, next level of forecasting, and so on.
Thank you, Bill. That's really, really helpful insight and advice. I appreciate it. And with that said, I'd like to jump into sort of a general Q&A session. I want to invite Beth and Kieran to turn on your cameras if you're willing to do so. I want to remind the audience that you can enter questions into the chat. Otherwise, we do have some pre-submitted questions that I can start with. Do we have anything in the chat, team? I don't see anything yet. Don't be shy, folks. All right, well, while we've got Kieran, Beth, and Bill here, I'll get started. One of the questions that was submitted previously, what are some typical challenges that agencies may face as they integrate cloud operations into their existing IT environments? And how does this guide in particular help agencies address some of these? I know we're all familiar with the guide, so curious to hear your thoughts here. It's an open floor.
I can start us off. So I think it varies, right? It depends on which agency you're looking at. So like I mentioned before, every agency has various levels of maturity with cloud, different resources that they have, how well they planned out their transition, how well their current environment, how clean it is, how well it's performing. Do they have existing architecture that's documented? Do they know where their applications are? All the interdependency, all of those are very important when you start migrating applications to a cloud environment. So, and then the amount of technical debt they may have and applications that won't necessarily function correctly, or they may not function optimally, especially on a cost basis with a cloud environment. So something that could be resource intensive on-prem. It's designed for, for someone running a data center with capacity that really doesn't need to be managed as finely as you would in a cloud environment, because everything costs money there. So I'd say, there's a host of things. Maybe legacy system compatibility would be one of the top things that comes to mind. And then I have to go back to the workforce challenges. So it's really important that agencies really need to tackle is that they may not have the right skill sets to operate how they want to operate within a cloud environment. So that's important. And then perhaps even resistance to change. I don't know how that is to date now, but I remember a few years ago, I was talking to a few agencies where one of them, they had a mainframe that they were running and they wanted to migrate off the mainframe into a different cloud solution. And the mainframe operators, they did not want to change because they're, all the IT staff, they're federal employees. They weren't contractors, so you wouldn't necessarily recompete a new contract to be able to support this new solution. So they really resisted change. And I was talking to their enterprise architect, and she said, they just don't want to do it. So that's something that folks have to kind of contend with, is upskilling and changing how you, or what type of skills you need to know. So those are some things that I've seen.
Yeah, I would add to that everything that Kieran just said, and I do remember those mainframe people from way back in the day when the PC first hit the desktops, and they were against that then too. So I'm surprised they're still around. But it's cloud literacy. It's cloud literacy across an organization, and so it's both skill sets and it's approach. And you may have a cloud team, and you may have a cloud team that's very skilled and they know what they're doing, but they still have to integrate with the rest of the organization. And that can be everything, again, from budgeting, licensing, other processes, other governance. And so you may have, I could call it, I refer to it as a circle and a square peg. So you have other teams and groups across an organization that are trying to make, fit what's happening in the cloud, fit the existing processes. And that can be very challenging. And not only challenging, it can be not productive. And you run into challenges and butting heads sometimes when your cloud team is trying to do something or being asked to fulfill a requirement. And this happens a lot of times, I think, with security related requirements that might take them, them a lag time in keeping up with. I mean, government mandates sometimes don't keep up with technology. And so you have your teams that are rightly so trying to meet their requirements and their mandates, and it just doesn't fit with what's happening in the cloud. So I think that can be a very big challenge, and it's sort of everyone, I think, needs to sort of realize that this is a paradigm shift, and how can that be met? How can you meet your requirements, meet what you need to do at the same time within the confines and the constructs of what the cloud is?
You're talking about multiple sets of stakeholders and being aligned. I know that the guide talks a lot about organizational change management. I think that, from my perspective, is kind of a key to addressing that challenge. So Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I give a good analogy. If you remember back in the day, a long time ago, when every server had a monitor that went with it, monitor and a keyboard. And so there could have been, let's say there was a requirement for every server, we want to document the serial number of the monitor that's with it. And then all of a sudden we had racks. We had one monitor that serviced multiple CPUs.
Right.
Well, if your person that came around going, I need to fit this requirement, I need a monitor number, and the person managing that rack says, but we don't have monitors for every CPU, well, there's a disconnect. So neither one is wrong, but you have to adapt. You have to, again, be able to say, okay, things have changed. How can we meet our end goal requirement with what our existing, environment and cloud is like?
Yeah, that's great. Do we have any questions in the chat yet? Otherwise, I have a few more I can go to. All right, so, one of the things that we talked about earlier is sort of this cloud journey and the evolution of cloud. And while we've certainly made a lot of progress in federal government, there's differing levels of maturity across agencies. So for those that are curious, any advice on kind of the overall business case for investing in cloud operations, either through your experience? Curious to hear your thoughts and perspectives here.
I think you should, when you adopt a new technology, when you do anything new, there's a basic level of investment that you have to make. So to use it at a basic foundational level. So you have to plan for that. So anything after that is really considered optimizing. So I think you have to look, for example, automation. We talk a lot about automation. You can do so many great things with it. Infrastructure of code, you can do all sorts of scripting, right? And then, but the bottom line is, it goes back to Beth's comment about really every agency is different. You have to find what works for you, and you can't be prescriptive. So some agency, they may be fine with the most rudimentary basic application of an infrastructure service, but another agency, they may benefit from automation. But anytime you make these leaps in progression, there's time and there's money that you have to spend, and you have to do a cost benefit analysis to see if it's worth it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of key. There's so many things you can do to mature your organization, but is it worth it for you? Does it make sense for you? That's really, I think, something that people have to really take a look at. And that goes back to understanding yourself. So you have to understand everything you have currently about you. You have to understand your budget. You have to understand your workforce. You have to understand your risk tolerance, understand your stakeholders. Everything kind of ties in together.
Yeah, I could bounce off of that, Kieran. I think that, total cost of ownership, just the fact that it's not just the cloud. I mean, most of us live in a hybrid environment anyway, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But just the fact that, who are we doing this for? And what application, what system, what service are we supplying that supports the mission? And what's the value add for that mission? For driving that mission forward, because the cloud is going to be just one part of that. So understanding the whole big picture and understanding what your cost drivers are to support the mission, I think are really important and valuable aspects that you can communicate to your stakeholders.
Yeah, and I have to say one more thing, piggyback on that exactly. It's a really good point that you guys both made. There is there can be a thought that, oh, cloud is easy, just turn it on, AWS, Azure, they run it. Especially in government organizations, but in hybrid organizations, that's not accurate. That is not how it works. I've had people say, well, why do you need an IT staff still? Because the cloud does it all. But it's not, and especially having to integrate with your existing on-prem. Again, like we all said, with government, there's a lot of other requirements. It's not so black and white. So while I do believe the cloud offers a lot of benefits, it's not the best thing. It's not going to solve every problem out of the box. You definitely have to integrate. You definitely have to work within what our existing on-prem environments are, our existing requirements as federal agencies that we must adhere to. So agree. It's just it's a change in how each agent, IT staff function and have functioned.
Maybe we can double click on a little bit. Within your agency organizations, have there been any noticeable changes in policy or things like that may have helped improve cloud operations? I know there's a lot, the federal government we have to kind of be mindful of.
I think it's, as somebody said earlier about the initial resistance. I mean, I do remember, earlier on, very, very, some people very adamant, cloud, never cloud. So I think there's, as people have evolved and the clouds have matured, and I think even AWS, Azure, Google, your SaaS and PaaS providers, everybody's learned. So the existence of GovClouds and some of the requirements, that go with those, I think it's just more acceptance and more openness and understanding the cloud is here. It's not going anywhere, and it does have a lot of advantages. So it's not a binary, this is better or this is better, but it's an openness to explore and change some of what's been done and see the benefits and then work on addressing some of the challenges.
I wanted to double click on, you mentioned earlier application rationalization, the playbook that was developed out of your office. Maybe share a little bit more from your perspective on the role application rationalization plays, just generally speaking, with cloud operations.
Yeah, it's I missed the first part. Were you talking to me, Eric?
Yeah, it's you, Kieran.
Oh, okay.
Or anybody really on the panel, but I know you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So application rationalization, it's just portfolio management. It's incredibly simple concept that some people do, some people don't. Actually, agencies may be doing it now, but it just may not be labeled as application rationalization. But the idea fundamentally is to understand the systems that you have, the costs associated with those systems, and then what you're going to do with those systems in the future. For example, in terms of data center consolidation, then you may want to understand all the systems that are within your data center, all the interconnection points between them, have a cost associated with it, and then say that you have a need to close a data center. You got to figure out what you're going to do with it. So then you have a list of tools that kind of go along with it. Cloud is just a tool. It's not the answer for every single scenario. A scenario is that maybe you want to go to a co-location facility and then keep your systems and data there. Maybe you want to get rid of this system. Maybe you want to go to a shared service. Maybe you want to go to a SaaS solution. It doesn't matter. But the point is you need a structured process to be able to evaluate what you're going to be doing. And then you need to have visibility at an enterprise level to be able to see everything that's going on in the enterprise. And you should really be communicating this with the C-suite, the CFOs, and the other stakeholders to kind of get a business outlook for everything that you're doing. So that kind of sums up what application rationalization is.
Super helpful, Kieran. And I know there's a playbook that's on CI.gov as well. So I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that resource if it'll be helpful. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, and I think that lines up with what Beth was saying, is that initially is just lift and shift to the cloud. And if you're really doing application rationalization, then one of those metrics that you want to achieve is what is best suited for the cloud. And then that determines, do we have to refactor the code? Do we have to write from scratch? Or are we just going to wait for net new applications that are cloud native and keep our operations as they are until those applications are no longer needed and deprecate off our systems?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I'm looking in the chat. I think there's a question by William around FedRAMP and security. Oh, it looks like we provided a response. I know we covered FedRAMP in the guide as well. So hopefully, William, that addresses your question. Are there any other questions from our audience today? Otherwise, with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today. Karen, Beth, Bill, I really appreciate you taking time out of your days to join us in this important discussion. Karen, I know you'd mentioned a lot of the initiatives coming out of your work there within the Office of Government-Wide Policy. I'm thinking maybe with the team here, we can follow up and provide references and links to some of those important resources. Bill, you talked a little bit about, FinOps. It sounds like we can probably share some helpful resources there as well. And Beth, again, if there's anything else that you wanted to kind of promote or share, I think as a follow-up action here, we can send that to the audience today. With that being said, thank you everyone for your time. Hopefully this was a helpful discussion. I sure learned a lot, and I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.